Good morning. Many thanks for joining us for this webinar. I'm Warren Butler. I'm one of the directors here at Preacts. Joining me for today's presentation is Dan May from Ramsac, or one of our IT partners. Over the next 30 minutes, we're going to be taking a look at cloud services and cutting through the jargon and the hype surrounding these solutions to help you assess if they're suitable for your business. We'll define what's meant by the cloud, and we'll explain how companies are using these services. We'll also tackle concerns about cloud security and take a look at the future of cloud business solutions. We'll close off by focusing on the example of Microsoft Dynamics CRM to demonstrate why businesses are increasingly choosing a cloud option in preference to traditional on-premise installations. Before we get started, just to confirm that all of the lines have been set to mute. That's deliberate, just to remove any background noise, but please do use the webinar control panel on the right of the screen to ask any questions as we go. And at the end, what we'll do is we'll run through these in a Q&A session. I think a lot of you are familiar with Preact, but the benefit of those that haven't worked with us previously, as a quick introduction, we're a consultancy specialising in customer relationship management. We've been implementing and supporting CRM applications since 1993, and we support just over 4,000 users of on-premise and cloud CRM solutions. We hold Microsoft's top accreditations for CRM and cloud services, and we've also been named to the Microsoft Dynamics President's Club, which puts us in the top 5% bracket of Microsoft partners worldwide. So to introduce cloud services, let me bring Dan into the presentation and pass that across to him. Thanks, Dan.
Excellent. Well, good morning, everybody. Hopefully you're seeing my screen now. Warren, is that?
Yeah, that's looking good. Thanks, Dan.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So the aim of my section of today's webinar is to talk to you about what the cloud is and to explain some of the jargon and cover a few of the things that you may need to bear in mind. I have aimed my content today largely at a non-technical audience, which is, I hope, what you're expecting. We're going to look at cloud from a business decision maker's point of view, rather than getting into the nuts and bolts of the technology. If you do want a more technical discussion, then I'd be more than happy to speak to you at the end or arrange a phone call after this session. But to start with, really, my goal today is to look at cloud from a sort of a big picture point of view. So, as you've already been told, my name is Dan May. I'm the Commercial Director here at Ramsac. We've been making IT simple since 1992, and we're cloud neutral. So what that means is that we've got experience with both traditional servers and with cloud, and we've worked very much on finding the right solution for the right situation, rather than finding, rather than a sort of a one-size-fits-all approach. So we provide a whole host of IT solutions, and our core aim really is about reducing stress levels as far as technology is concerned. So to start off with, let's ask the question, what is cloud? Basically, the cloud is somewhere to store your stuff, your data, and your applications, the applications being the things that allow you to do things with your stuff. That's as untechnical as I can make it, really. So the utopian vision is that we will all end up consuming our applications and consuming the storage of our data in the same way as we do our electricity, our gas, or our water. And some people call that utility computing. The way that that's achieved, as with other utilities, is standardization and massive economies of scale. So the cloud providers would build large farms of servers, and then they would look to squeeze as many customers as possible onto those servers. So in many cases, most of you will have heard probably of Office 365 from Microsoft, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. The provider themselves, so with Office 365, Microsoft, offers little or no support, and they leave that for other IT support providers like us or Preacts to take care of. There are a wide variety of cloud-based services and applications out there, catering for both niches, such as a specialist acupuncture clinic system, for example, through to mainstream common applications like CRM, email, storage, and accounts. In many cases, cloud applications are accessible via a standard web browser, but there are applications which have a full application installed on your local machine, which then interacts with an application based out in the cloud. It's fair to say that cloud computing isn't new. If you've been using Hotmail to access your personal emails via the web for the last 10 years, well, guess what? You've been cloud computing. What's changed, however, is the scale of the applications that are now being delivered in this way, and of course the availability of fast and reliable internet connections. That combination has caused some to predict that cloud is the most significant development in IT since the advent of broadband, say 10 years or so ago. So the screen now is looking at the landscape around cloud. So as I say, we look at the sort of the traditional model, now being referred to as on-premise computing, as well as cloud computing. And we've broken our cloud solutions into 3 different flavors, and they're words that will probably become quite familiar to you as you're looking at possible cloud solutions. So pure cloud is a model where you have no servers at all. Everything is based on a cost per user per month basis. That really is the utopian vision that I just mentioned. It works for some organizations, but not for all. It's particularly popular with business startups, organizations that want to undertake a complete refresh of their existing infrastructure, organizations who don't have a physical site office in which to base their hardware, and organizations who want to be able to scale up or scale down their user base at short notice. The biggest downside to pure cloud is that currently you are limited as to the choice of applications that are available to you, and you have very limited control over how you tailor those applications. On the plus side, however, the implementation is relatively quick and easy, and there's very little upfront capital investment. 2 other models that you can see on the screen there: hybrid cloud, and that's where, as the name suggests, you do a little bit of a mixture of both, really. So you keep some servers internally, usually for the applications or data that either can't be moved to the cloud or that you'd prefer not to, but you move some data or applications to the cloud, for example, email, intranet, or CRM. This option is really popular with organizations that have some data or applications that they definitely don't want to host externally, but others that they're more relaxed about doing so. It's great for organizations that want to overhaul just a part of their current network infrastructure rather than changing an entire system. Again, it reduces capital and management cost of the new service provision whilst keeping some parts of your service provision running as it currently does. Finally, we've got private cloud. So private cloud is where you can have your own virtual servers, but they are hosted in the cloud and paid for on a monthly basis. So that works well if you want to avoid the upfront cost of buying hardware, because effectively you're using someone else's hardware, but you've got applications and data that can't be moved into a pure cloud environment. So you want to maintain an element of your service, your current applications, and control over that application or data. So it's really popular organizations that want that flexibility of what they use, organizations that have a large number of remote workers or a highly mobile workforce, and organizations that don't want to have kit in their own office but still want that complete flexibility of what they use. Gives you full control of servers. They're hosted in a highly secure, highly available environment. There's very little upfront capital expenditure, but you are dependent, again, on that sound internet connection in order to work, and you do really need to look at the long-term costs, and we'll talk about that in a moment. So at this point, it's probably worth just explaining some of the jargon that you're probably hearing if you're already looking at cloud services. We like jargon in the IT industry, but let's try and break through some of that for you. SaaS is something that you've probably heard, software as a service. It's the thing that you're most likely to come across. It includes things like Google Apps, Office 365, SharePoint, and of course Dynamics CRM, Salesforce.com, etc. So it's applications that you consume as a service. You'll subscribe. It will include the application itself and the storage of your data, as well as backup and an element of support. Infrastructure as a service is something that you may well have heard about as well, abbreviated to the IaaS, and it's what we mentioned earlier as private cloud. So rather than buying your servers as physical bits of tin that sit in your rack or on your floor, you buy them as virtual machines and you pay monthly to use them. So you never need to worry about the hardware upgrades, and you've got the flexibility to run what you want on those virtual servers, but they need to be managed, backed up and supported by you. And finally, platform as a service is probably something that you're using every day, but you don't realize it when you shop online. So platform as a service allows you to run your own custom-written applications, but just pay for the resources that are used. So an e-commerce site, for example, would pay low costs for most of the year when their site is running under normal load, but then might be able to scale up instantly and pay more just for the sort of the Christmas shopping rush, as an example. So what are we seeing the cloud used for today? Well, the Microsoft official line is that everybody is rushing out and putting everything into the cloud. I think in reality, we're seeing something that's a little bit different to that. We're certainly seeing quite a bit of true software as a service with Office 365, Microsoft's cloud offering, which includes services such as CRM and Outlook, etc. And we're seeing plenty of use for storage, things like Evernote, SkyDrive, and Dropbox. There are some services like Mimecast, as an example, which provides email filtering and email archive and spam facilities. Well, they've been around for years and weren't previously called cloud services until cloud became such a vogue word. We're seeing LiveDrive used again for online storage and backup, and we've got quite a few clients who have gone down the private cloud route with virtual private servers, often using a large player in this market is a company called Rise. Data protection, I know it's not the most interesting thing to talk about on a webinar, but I will just mention it briefly because it is something we get asked about quite a bit. It is important that you're aware that if you put all of your data to a software as a service cloud provider, you as a business are still legally responsible for that data as the data controller, so you don't pass those responsibilities over to whoever's hosting that software for you. So if the cloud provider was to have a breach and the personal data that you store is made public, you will be expected to show that you've completed sort of appropriate due diligence on that provider. So if you just picked up the cheapest or the first one that you came across on Google, you could be held responsible for for potential fines from the Information Commissioner's Office. There are some really good books out there that cover due diligence for cloud service, and I'm more than happy to send you some details, or indeed we're happy to provide some independent advice if you're considering moving to the cloud with any provider. Warren mentioned we'd talk about some of the hype around cloud, and I think it's worth just saying, don't be sucked in by the hype. As you can see on this screen, there's some great figures here. Global spend on cloud services predicted to rise from $40 billion to $241 billion over the next 8 years. So clearly, it's a massive growth area in technology. However, in 2012, that accounted for just over 1% of global IT spend, and that predicted rise by 2020 sees that rise to about 7%. So it's growing in popularity, but don't feel pressured into doing it just because everybody else is. Interestingly, whilst Gartner have downgraded predictions for enterprise use of cloud, they have also predicted that by 2014, personal cloud will have replaced the PC as the center of our digital lives. So in other words, they predict less computers sat on our desks at home as more of us use things like iPads and smartphones to access data that we store on in the cloud and access from wherever we might be. The recurring theme here, well, as with everything else, there has to be a clear business case before you make a move one way or the other. So where do we see the future going over the next couple of years? We certainly see hybrid cloud becoming mainstream, with more and more people pushing what we would class as commodity functions like email and intranet out to the cloud in order to cut down on hardware, power, cooling, and management costs. There is almost certainly going to be a growth in the consumer and small business space where the cost of physical servers and backup devices are becoming disproportionately expensive. More and more software vendors will be creating cloud versions of their applications, and that will allow more choice for those going down a pure cloud route. And I think we'll definitely see a development and growth in private clouds as well. I think the big risk to the marketplace at the moment is that what happens if one of the large pure cloud vendors has a major security breach or data loss. That will undoubtedly knock confidence, at which point organizations considering moving to the cloud will hold off, and those already in the cloud will consider moving data back under their own control. So thinking about your next steps. If you are thinking about a cloud deployment, make sure you think about it strategically. Consider the long-term costs, the implications, and the risks. Do not underestimate the cost and the time involved in migrating to a cloud service. We've seen a number of clients where they've assumed it's just a case of signing up to an Amazon or a Google service, clicking some buttons and moving their data across. The reality is that is seldom the case. It's almost always a significant planning process that needs to be involved, and then a staged migration over a period of time to ensure that it's a smooth process. We've got loads of experience of doing this, and we'd be very happy to give you some advice. Don't be pushed into thinking that you have to move everything to the cloud just because it's what people are talking about in the pub. Do use it where it's appropriate. Some functions are really well suited, and others aren't. Make sure you do appropriate due diligence before moving. Make sure you know where your data is, and most importantly, what the process is for getting it back if you need to. And with a number of new entrants into the marketplace at the moment, there are bound to be some who are doing it on a shoestring and some who will fail. You don't want to be the person that arrives in the office on a Monday morning to find that your cloud provider has gone bust. This is where I say, linking back to that due diligence, let's make sure that this is a really thought through proper cloud solution that you're using, and that you haven't just bought a service which, unbeknownst to you, is hosted in the bedroom of an IT geek somewhere in the deepest, darkest recesses of Surrey or wherever that might be. Finally, do try and ignore the hype. A significant number of clients who come to us looking at cloud are doing so because a friend or at the pub or at the golf club has said that everyone's doing it. It definitely has the potential to revolutionize technology, but it's not going to take over the world tomorrow. A good IT provider should be providing you with a balanced view, because there really is no one-size-fits-all solution. So that's really a very quick overview of cloud computing. I've tried to keep things really simple here, as I think there's enough people out there already trying to muddy the waters. However, I appreciate the fact that you've booked onto today's webinar with Preacts means that you're possibly at a point where you're either thinking about a cloud project, or perhaps where you're at a crossroads where a decision needs to be made about the current IT infrastructure. As I said at the beginning, I will be really happy to talk to you after the webinar to answer any questions you may have, or to arrange a chance to come and see you. And whilst not wanting to give you a sales pitch, I do just want to add that we've got 22 years experience in the IT industry. We provide a really wide range of solutions and services that you can use to plug the gaps that may exist within your own IT team, whether that's project assistance, IT strategy, or general day-to-day IT support. And of course, we work really closely with our friends at Preacts in order to ensure that the infrastructure and the data and the customer intelligence side of the network are really joined up and optimized. So if you do want to get in touch, speak to either me or one of our tech consultants, I'll put my contact details on the screen, or of course speak to Warren or one of the guys at Preacts, who will be happy to pass on our details. So with that, Warren, I'm going to pass back over to you, and
Thanks, Dan.
Share your screen now. There you go, Warren.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, great stuff. Excellent. So I just want to finish off by taking a look at a specific example of Microsoft Dynamics, just to review some of the trends in the CRM market and to demonstrate how cloud services are changing the way that businesses are implementing IT solutions. I've chosen Dynamics really because it's a solution that we're familiar with at Preacts, but also it's one that offers a choice between on-premise and the cloud. And the rising popularity that we've seen in the cloud option underlines a lot of the points that Dan's touched on. So if we're looking at a comparison of the features and the functionality between the two, there really isn't any difference between them. They've both got the same set of sales, marketing and service tools, and they're supported with a variety of mobile devices. And they're also offering now a comparable level of customization and integration. That previously used to be a big difference between the two. Businesses often had to opt for the on-premise package just because they wanted to integrate CRM with another data source like their accounting system, because cloud systems just didn't offer the same level of customization. Nowadays that really isn't a defining factor, as Microsoft and other cloud providers offer virtually the same scalability between cloud and on-premise applications. Dan flashed up some statistics. I've got a few more for you, and this is just a snapshot of statistics specific to the CRM market that we work with that have been published over the last 12 months, which just sort of underlines the rising popularity of cloud services in CRM. And for you to pick out, double-digit growth in the cloud CRM market and a total share that's estimated at around 40%, with the expectation that half of all CRM systems will be deployed in the cloud within the next 6 to 7 years. And based on the levels of demand for cloud CRM that we're already seeing, we expect that 50% mark to be reached even earlier than that. As Dan mentioned, Microsoft very enthusiastic towards the cloud, and they've stated that in the 12 months to June 2013, that 2/3 of new Dynamics customers chose a cloud implementation. Now that covers all of the markets and the industries that Microsoft operate in, including the enterprise level, but Preacts, and I think mainly Ramsac, will work with small to medium-sized businesses. And if we look at that particular market over the same period, for Preacts at least, that figure rose to about 80%, or roughly every 4 cloud CRM activations for each 1 new on-premise installation. So, begs the question, why are businesses choosing cloud CRM? Now, I touched on the increased sophistication of cloud services like Dynamics CRM Online. That's partly driving that change, but there are several important factors, and I picked out 4 just to highlight this. Firstly, with the cloud, you can get up and running significantly quicker compared to an on-premise CRM package, because there's no server installation. You can just complete the registration form and the service is immediately activated. Of course, there's still a need to personalize the database to migrate the data, but it does remove what can be a protracted server install and configuration. As well as reducing the implementation timescales, the cloud removes the overhead of managing CRM on a server, so there's no need to manually apply service packs, hotfixes, carry out hardware maintenance, or even incur the expense of powering that equipment. And for their cloud service, Microsoft have a 99.9% uptime service level agreement that's financially backed, and it typically offers far better service level commitment than an on-premise system would. Like any cloud service, a CRM package would be treated as an operating cost rather than a capital asset that's going to be written down over several years, and that makes CRM in the cloud a more tax efficient option. Also, a cloud service tends to be far easier to budget with a flat subscription each month that includes all updates, so there aren't any upgrades you have to purchase afterwards. There's no need to factor in those costs or the maintenance that are typically characteristics of an on-premise system. Cloud also gives more flexibility if user numbers need to reduce in the future. So whereas with an on-premise package you might have unused licenses that have been paid for but aren't assigned to active users, with a cloud package like Dynamics Online, it's more effective because you can reduce the subscription number, so you're only paying for what you use. And finally, a more recent trend that's emerging that we're finding is that cloud subscribers are consistently receiving the new product features and extended services earlier compared to on-premise customers. And Microsoft have been very sort of clear in taking a cloud-first approach to its Dynamics CRM release schedule, with new updates appearing in the cloud several months in advance of the on-premise system. And as an example, they released a cloud-only update at the start of this year, which featured things like Skype integration and a new iPad interface for CRM, and it's only now, some 9 months later, that the same functions are being made available to on-premise customers. And that's partly because in their sort of discussions with on-premise customers, the database administrators were telling Microsoft that they prefer to only apply one major update each year. But nonetheless, if you're an end user, it does mean that new updates will consistently appear in the cloud rather earlier than they would with the on-premise edition. So that's my quick overview of some of the trends that we're seeing, just to highlight examples of how the cloud is changing the CRM market. So let me just pass back to Dan for his closing comments.
Thanks, Warren. Yeah, I think really there's a lot of support there. Whilst I said in my presentation that there's the take-up isn't huge globally, I think in terms of application rollouts rather than entire IT rollouts, that's definitely the trend we're seeing as well. So the move tends to be, I will put something like CRM or something like email or Exchange into the cloud rather than just putting my entire network cloud-based straight away. So that's just to sort of clarify the link between those two sets of statistics. The other thing that I think we get asked quite a lot, Warren, I'm sure you get asked the same, is what about security? What I would say is that providing you've done your due diligence and you're using a partner and you've got a really solid framework agreement in place, there are very few organizations out there for whom their server room could be anywhere near as secure as a data center. So the kind of, in order to operate a decent cloud solution working in a data center, you've got a highly secure environment with physical security as well as sort of IT security, and you've got such resilience in terms of backup, in terms of power, in terms of connectivity. So I don't really think that security is the barrier that I think it's the initial question that a lot of people ask us is this going to be secure if I'm giving my data to somebody else? But I don't know if you'd agree with me, Warren.
Yeah, absolutely. It's certainly a consideration that people have, but when people do their due diligence, they're satisfied that the responsible cloud providers can deliver. I mean, for example, we've recently deployed Dynamics CRM Online to a private bank. Yes, they had a lot of questions, but when they looked at it, they looked at Microsoft's policies. They were happy that their data would be more secure with Microsoft than it would on their own systems.
Absolutely. I mean, there are very few of us that have the kind of data, the kind of power backup and resilience and the kind of, physical protection in our server rooms in our own offices that we would ever get in this kind of environment.
Excellent. Thanks, Dan. Well, we're going to stay on the line for a few questions. There is one that's come through, which I'll throw over to Dan. Is the cloud the same as hosting?
Well, I think yes and no, and I think this is where I talked about the sort of the infrastructure as a service. I mean, hosting is effectively putting data into a data center and accessing it remotely via the internet. And cloud is a very catch-all term that literally means that. So yes and no is a really woolly answer. Definitely, it would be an element of cloud service, but it depends. Again, there are all kinds of different hosting models, and the infrastructure as a service that I talked about is very much, you don't have to buy your physical rack space, you don't have to buy your physical kit. You can access that on a virtual basis, and Rise is a company that we work with quite closely to look at that. Whereas some hosting solutions, you are still responsible for physically filling a rack and physically buying the kit, which doesn't save you the sort of the capital investment that the infrastructure as a service kind of model would provide you with.
Great. Well, many thanks for your time this morning in attending this session. I do hope you found it useful. As I said, we're going to stay on the line for a few more minutes, so if you do have any questions, please do use the console and we'll respond. And if you do want to follow up on any of the points, please do contact either Dan with the details on the screen or myself at preact.co.uk. But in the meantime, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Okay, Dan, we've got one more question that's come through.
Okay.
Okay, will Cloud CRM be quicker than using conventional VPN connections?
I think that's a conversation to be had based on, I mean, speed, of course. I mean, I would imagine yes. I've got to be honest, I've not used our CRM via a VPN. Obviously, the main consideration there is going to be your internet connectivity, but certainly the bandwidth coming out of the hosted environment is going to be far superior to the bandwidth coming out of an on-premise solution. So I would imagine that assuming the end user connecting has got a decent internet connection, then yeah, I would expect to see that probably being of a higher speed, because at the end of the day, you're accessing data that is stored in a much bigger, more resilient environment than it's going to be in an on-premise solution.
Yeah, I mean, certainly for our part, we're always asked about the speed and performance of Cloud CRM. In the first case, we always recommend that people set up the trial just to gauge speed, and even people that have been in normally poor connection areas have been sort of pleasantly surprised by the speed and performance that they're getting.
Absolutely, and I think the other thing, of course, is with it being a hosted solution, it's a quicker access for those remote users that don't necessarily want to dial in via a VPN and go through all that login process. I think the remote access is probably, I'm fair in saying, Warren, is a bit more efficient, a bit quicker, and easier for the end user to get into.
Yeah, I think so. I hope that's answered your question, John. We're certainly happy to follow up offline and go into a bit more detail for you. And we've got another question that's come through. Is bandwidth a concern in the cloud, or perhaps is lack of bandwidth a concern in the cloud?
Short answer is yes, definitely. Now that being said, it depends what you're using it for, and I think that's again, that's probably one of those conversations to have offline in terms of what is it that you're talking about accessing and how many people, etc., etc. Obviously, if you've got an entire, as I said in the presentation, one of the downsides of sort of the pure cloud model is you're entirely dependent on the internet connection. So depending on how many people you've got in your premises all trying to access at the same time, yeah, definitely it's going to have an impact on your bandwidth. So that's part of the due diligence process that you need to go through, really, in terms of working out, are you talking about accessing just one application, in which case, then the requirement's going to be far narrower. So if you're just looking at CRM online, for example, but everything else is still being accessed locally. But yeah, I mean, if you've got 30 or 40 staff in your office all accessing all of their applications and all of their data all the time, then yes, it is going to have an impact on bandwidth for sure. Now, of course, there are ways around that, and be that multiple broadband lines that are bonded together, or be that specialist sort of lease lines. And indeed, obviously we're seeing more and more sort of fibre coming to the cabinets, which is again providing high-speed broadband connectivity at a far reduced price. There are many ways to approach it, but yeah, it's definitely something we need to look at. As I say, that's why it's really important that you don't just go onto Google, find a cloud provider, click go, and start running down that route. It's a project that really needs to be considered.
Great, thanks. I think that's all the questions that we've got, so I'm just going to close this session, but certainly if you do have any more questions, please do email either Dan or myself, wbutler@preact.co.uk. And again, many thanks for your time in attending this morning.